and your ongoing support enables us to plan and produce the many other programs you attend throughout the year. I'd also like to welcome the many Secret Service and first responders in the audience today. We thank you for your service. And we hope you'll have a special interest in the film tonight. We also invite you to explore the wide range of programs we offer at Smithsonian Associates. And I'd like to thank our friends at Lionsgate for your support in making tonight's screening possible. Before we get started, I'd like to take a moment to ask you to silence your cell phones or anything else that might make noise during the program. Thank you for doing that.
And to turn off the devices so we don't have to glare from them.
Yes, please turn off your devices. You all are in luck tonight because not only do you get to see Angel Has Fallen before it opens widely on August 23rd, but you also get to hear from the film's co-writer and director, Ric Roman Waugh, and its technical advisor, Mickey Nelson. Waugh began his career as a stuntman, the son of legendary stunt coordinator Fred Waugh. Jerry Bruckheimer and the late Tony Scott were early champions and mentors who helped guide him to his work as a writer and director. Before co-writing and directing Angel Has Fallen, Waugh's previous work included Shot Caller, Snitch, and Felon. He also produced and directed the critically hailed documentary That Which I Love Destroys Me, which follows two special operations soldiers as they grapple with PTSD and upon their return to the United States. Mickey Nelson is a partner at Command Group and an expert on the subjects of protective security, contingency, and emergency planning for senior officials and executives and special operations. Nelson is a 28-year veteran of the United States Secret Service, where he spent the majority of his career in operational and management roles in the USSS Protective Division. Previously, Nelson served as Assistant Director of the Secret Service in the Office of Protective Operations, where he's directly responsible for overseeing the presidential, vice presidential, and dignitary protective divisions. We're going to invite Ric on stage to say a few words to introduce the film, and then they'll join us along with Mickey and Brian Truitt of USA Today to answer your questions. So now please join me in welcoming Ric Roman Waugh.
I'll keep this brief, but for those of you who have seen the first two installments of this franchise, we wanted to bring something new to it. We wanted to keep the fun and the excitement of it, but offer something new and fresh. And for those of you who haven't seen the first two movies, this is the perfect entry point. Because this time it's about the man, Mike Manning, and what it's like to lead a life of service. So for those of you that do that for us here in this room, that protect us and keep us safe, thank you. This is for you.
Hi, I'm Brian Truitt for USA Today. Thank you all for coming. And I think we have some special guests we need to get up here to talk. Co-writer and director Ric Roman Waugh. He's coming. It's good to be here. He's coming. There's Ric Roman Waugh, co-writer and director of Angel Has Fallen, and Mickey Nelson, technical advisor. 28 years with the Secret Service, and apparently Hollywood's next big star. Was that you?
What do you think, really? Yeah. Suffice it to say that Gerard Butler and Morgan Freeman have nothing to worry about after that movie.
But you had lines. Rick gave you lines. What was it like making your big screen debut? Were you a little nervous?
I was very nervous to start with, and it kind of went down like I've never even had this conversation with Rick. We were standing up there, and Rick said, "Hey, what would you say in this scene?" And I said something like, "Bring the living room around now." Rick goes, "Okay, Mickey's going to do the next scene," and I was like, "Ha ha ha! Yeah, God, this is going to happen." Unlike the Secret Service, though, Rick gave me several takes to get it right. Where in the Secret Service, we only have one take usually. So,
Yeah, that's an important one take too. Rick, we talked a little bit about, before the screen, you had talked about kind of the James Bond-ness of these movies where they're standalone elements, but also there's a bigger picture mythology to them. And each director has been able to put their stamp on these movies. What is the most you thing about Angel Has Fallen? How does it reflect you as a filmmaker?
I think the thing that you find with the movies that I make is I try to put you in a first-person point of view of what the characters are going through. So hopefully you're not just being voyeurs watching something happening on the screen, but you actually feel like you're a participant within the characters, within the story, within the action. It comes from my action background of always trying to bring the audience along on the ride, and I hopefully try to do that too with storytelling. And the first two installments were about an event. It was about the taking of the White House. It was about the attack that happened in London Has Fallen on the G20 or the G8, I can't remember which one it was. And Gerard Butler and I have been wanting to work together for quite a while, and he called me and asked me if I would be interested in the third installment, and I said, well, but if is it Die Hard? What is it, Die Hard in the Bus this time, or what is it? And he said, no, actually, that's what I don't want to do. I want to make a movie that's more about the man and a life of service, and that caught my attention. It was a way to, I thought it was really an interesting, great summer action hook to have the #1 protector of the president to be suddenly America's Most Wanted, to go as a fugitive. And so you put the character that you've seen in the first two movies always on offense, always just unleashing carnage on the bad guys, to actually flip that and to put him on defense for a good big chunk of the movie, and what that would feel like and how he would have to survive without trying to hurt fellow law enforcement, because they're not the bad guys, they don't know any different. And so how does he do that? And then flip the switch to where you get to have your fun and remember the Mike Banning we love when he wants to kick ass and take names. But also, in your reference to the Bond franchise, and obviously massive legacy compared to what this franchise is. But if you look at the movie Skyfall, what I loved about that Bond movie, out of all of them, is you actually got to meet the man. You found out where he came from, what made him tick, what struggles he was going through, which I find from the documentary I made on a Delta Force operator, that which I love destroys me, and from knowing Mickey and a lot of the special operations and law enforcement community. And I think this goes for professional athletes, it goes for anybody that does these jobs that are very physical, with high intensity, with adrenaline, that you, I don't know if addicted is the right word, but you become wired to that, to where that is your life. And then you do everything you can to keep doing it. And it's the long in the tooth quarterback that's trying to stay in the NFL, as long as he can. Everybody's saying, why is he doing it? It's the boxer in the ring that is still going and saying, why the hell is he hurting himself? Why isn't he just retiring? I think it's no different from law enforcement and military and people of service, that you love what you do, the sense of duty, the sense of honor of this man's job in real life, and I want to make a fun, kick-ass summer action movie. But at the same time, I wanted to bring a little bit more gravitas to this franchise and show you the cost of that, of how hard it would be to hang up the guns, so to speak. How you would do everything you can to try to preserve that rush, that sense of duty, the sense of hypervigilance that you live. I think it's that whole thing of being put out to pasture that scares us all, and it scares me. Luckily I found a profession that can wheel me around until I'm 100, hopefully, and I can try to keep doing this job. But I have a high reverence for Mickey and our law enforcement community and our military community, so I wanted to bring that a day in the life of the service kind of element to this.
Mickey, can you speak to that? Obviously, I don't know. You may have had, a few days that were just as exciting as Mike Banning's here, but you probably can't tell us. But do you see the emotional toll it takes on him, the physical toll? You know, he's torn between his job and his family. You know, his wife cares for him and just wants to see him all right, and yet, like Rick said, there's like a Brett Favre. He's like Brett Favre. He doesn't want to leave the game. You know, he's kind of addicted to it a little bit. Well, it speaks to like how authentic that portrayal is to a real life Secret Service member's life.
Well, I think it is tough, and some of my colleagues in the audience, I think, would agree with me here. But it does take a toll personally on you. I mean, I traveled, and everyone in this, all my colleagues here traveled to between 70 and 100 countries throughout the world. There's no 9-to-5 jobs in the Secret Service. There's no weekends off in the Secret Service. So you got to be on all the time. And I think, like Mike Banning represented in the movie, it does take a toll on you. So I think that part of the movie accurately depicts a day in the life of the Secret Service. Now, as far as all the attacks, that would have been a bad day if any of us had that. Thank goodness we didn't have to. But
the worst thing in Hollywood is when the writer goes, "What if?"
Well, and I was going to ask about that because we've seen presidential assassination attempts in movies before. Like we've had Harrison Ford have his plane hijacked. But that with the bat drones and everything, that seems eerily like it could happen, and it would be really dangerous to be a part of that. How did that kind of come about? And was there a little real life it was based on?
Well, I mean, to start, the one thing that I promised Mickey, and Mickey knows that about me, this was never going to be a tell-all about the Secret Service, their tactics. In fact, we fudged stuff on purpose with some of their calls and signs and how they do things, because we don't need to give up that kind of stuff. We just wanted to give enough of the essence that you felt it was grounded and real. And, I had told Mickey that from my special operations knowledge and I think it's obviously evident around the world right now that drone warfare has become a massive thing, and it puts everybody on defense. How do you be on offense from something that can be launched from miles away, outside your perimeter? And we talked about that, and that is obviously something that is not only the Secret Service, but law enforcement and military is dealing with today. And I'd seen hover drones and all that stuff, but I thought, when I found out that there is a new type of drone warfare that we're using now with artificial intelligence, where they can act as a swarm and used for reconnaissance and surveillance, and they can be weaponized, I thought that was a way to create an action sequence where the idea is to make it feel like we were there. And I hired like 10 cameramen from the Golf Channel trying to chase golf balls, but to really make it feel like you were in the middle of this attack. The eerie thing that happened is during the filming of it, the president of Venezuela had an assassination attempt on his life from drone warfare, and that was eerie, to see. So sometimes you try to find that fine line of relevancy and making things contemporary to give you authenticity, but at the same time not take it so far that it suddenly becomes too grounded. That's a very fine balance that I know I battle as a filmmaker, because my movies I always try to make my movies as authentic as possible, as well as entertainment. One of the reasons I wanted Mickey, and there were a lot of real law enforcement in the movie, there were a lot of real private contractors and former operators in the movie, because for me, authenticity breeds authenticity. So then suddenly when Mickey is standing in the room with these guys, and they're suddenly paying attention to what he's doing, and I love that. So the movies I made in prison, about the prison system, was no different. I mean, when we did a riot in Shot Caller with 200, prison gangsters, they were 200 real guys, and so that type of stuff, helps, it leads itself to making the movie more authentic.
Mickey, is there something like a little detail Rick put in that a little cool detail that like a Secret Service people would find and be like, oh, that's a really neat little Easter egg, that we would have no clue what it was?
Well, I think the one of the things that Rick and I talked about early on, and one of the most important things the movie does represent, is the ongoing day-to-day challenge of the Secret Service to stay ahead of emerging technologies, whether that be drones, whether that be cyber, whether that be some sort of other offensive technology that we don't even know about right now, that the Secret Service's job day in and day out, and the other first responders and the military for that matter, is to stay ahead of that and outguess the adversary. And that's a tough order.
I want to talk a little bit about the scene. My favorite scene in the movie, and I think maybe some in the audience.
That was the scene I was in, right?
That was, yeah. But number two, a close second is the Nick Nolte blows up the forest scene. It's so well done because, you think it's over, and then no, it's not over. There's some effort still to happen.
It's never over, man.
And it keeps going until kind of like the final barrage. How did that kind of come about? Was that scene, how heinous was that scene to kind of put together with all the explosions and people? I'm sure there were some stunt people flying around,
Yeah, I think, it originated because I wanted to build two characters, a father and son, that could both be struggling from battles of war, whether it's PTSD or whatever it may be. But I wanted them to contrast each other, realize that not everybody's battle struggles are the same, so that a father who ran away from war and hid in the hole, so to speak, has met his son and thinks he can help him, and doesn't realize that his son is actually trying to run back into war, that he's addicted to it. So there'd be that kind of contrast. But we also wanted to have levity, obviously, with Nick Nolte and have fun with it. And we thought, well, if Grandpa's been sitting up in these woods, he would definitely have some booby traps in his thing. And then we said, well, if he was a tunnel rat, he would definitely have claymores laying around and everything else. And next thing you know, we just started coming up with this whole kind of scenario where it could be this fun thing about, the whole metaphor of old bull, young bull, where we've seen Mike Manning go hand to hand with everybody and just see Grandpa sit back with a button and just start blowing people up, and the fun part is first of all, I must be the smartest guy in the world because I hired Nick Nolte to play his father, and he said yes. I mean, you're done right there. But you hope that your actors and your cast are going to have chemistry with each other. And the minute Nick and Jerry got together, you just saw it. It was electric. You knew that they felt like father and son. You saw the struggles with them. And what you love about somebody like Nick Nolte is, he's 78 years old. Morgan Freeman is 81 years old, and they have nothing left to prove. I mean, look at the resumes of those two men, and yet they came every day with their A game, wanted to make it better, wanted to bring in their own type of creative ideas, and just had a great time. The crew flipped over. It was so much fun to be with them. But Nolte just turned him loose.
Was Nick a hard sell to put in that right at the end credit scene there with the, in the isolation chamber thing? Is that a hard sell for him?
No, the hard sell was keeping his clothes on because there could have been a very different version that Nolte had no problem with. In fact, he started doing push-ups. He was like, everybody all pumped on. He's 78, he started doing push-ups. But then he had steel hips now, so we had to pick him up and put him back up. But no. There's no worry what Nolte's going to do in front of camera. It's trying to calm him down.
You mentioned Morgan Freeman. It's fun to see a president back in the White House briefing room. We haven't seen that in a while. But we've seen his career track with these movies. He went from a cabinet member to a VP, and finally, kind of the Oval Office here. And he's obviously played a president before. Do you direct him, or do you be just like, you be Morgan Freeman?
Every actor is different of how I approach them. Am I going to tell Morgan Freeman, how to act? No, but we are going to talk about what to act. We're going to be on the same page with the story. We're going to do that with every actor. But yeah, when a guy has played God, he's played Mandela, he's played president. You kind of go in knowing he's got his things together there. And but when we first met and sat down and talked about it, and he understood that what I wanted to feel. If you think about it, one of the biggest stars in the world, the first time you actually get a glimpse of him is how it would be for the Secret Service. Is you have POTUS in the Oval Office, and they're standing at the doorway to take the press room, and Morgan Freeman, you think it's Morgan, he looks right by your face and gone. And you walk behind the president the way the Secret Service would. And he got that. He got that I wanted to be a day in the life, and the day in life of the struggles of his job and all the things that go with it. And, we just talked about his whole thing was really trying to, dignify what the struggles of what's going on, try to make things relevant without being political. Sometimes that's a very fine line and hard to do because I try to always give your good guys and your bad guys, your protagonists and your antagonists, real social relevancy and real things that we can attach to and relate to that builds up their characters and builds up their motives, so their motives don't seem just completely out of thin air. And so they all kind of attach to themselves, and so you try to find relevancy in things that are going on, current issues and so forth, and not lay them on too heavy, but enough that you feel like this could be, a modern day kind of thing.
And you're working with Jerry again with this movie Greenland that you just finished filming. Tell us a little bit about it and what people can expect.
Yeah, this was Angel Was Fallen was an amazing experience. We shot in 3 different countries and incredible cast, and there was something, again, I think it's more about less of the talent, it's more about chemistry. And Jerry and I realized that we had great chemistry as collaborators, as a filmmaker and a star. And so even through by the end of Angel Was Fallen, we were already talking about what can we do next, and I didn't want to make this another action movie, so to speak. I was looking for something different. If you look at all my movies, and I think even this one has a little bit of it, for a big summer action movie about moral ambiguity, I'm always trying to play in the gray of things. And this script, Greenland, came around, and it blew my mind because it was all about humanity, especially the division that we're finding in our country, but all over the world right now, and hyper-identity and all these things, but kind of forgetting that when catastrophic things happen, we're all going to have to come together, or we're not going to survive. And Greenland is about a comet that is supposed to go by the Earth. And when you start doing the research and you find out this is not far from the truth, these things are going by our planet all the time, things that we don't even know about. And it's supposed to be the Super Bowl party and everybody's going to be excited about it until it doesn't do what they thought and fragments start coming in through the outer atmosphere and one takes out Cuba. And suddenly you're like, oh my God, and they realize that there's a belt of these things and there are planet killers. And we're very close to being in the extinction period again. And 50,000, what we set up is that the United States, since the Cold War, which is true, we have these bunkers up in Greenland. They were built for nuclear fallout, so that if the continental United States had nuclear fallout, we would be able to save people and get a certain amount of people up out of that zone. And they've been sitting there forever, so we took a leap of faith and said, well, what if you data collected and you knew that you had an emergency plan that if something catastrophic was happening, but you could only save 50,000 people out of 300 million, well, you would pick skill sets. You would pick people of different job sectors and so forth to hopefully rebuild our country and sustain life again. And Gerard Butler's a structural engineer in the movie, and he's picked. But the hard part is none of his neighbors are. And you start to see where the neighborhood is coming alive and saying, please take my child with you, and he can't. And it's all about how humanity would act. Would good people do heinous things? Would bad people do good things? What would you be your own moral conscience? Would it be a selfish point of view of only saving your family, or would you become selfless and save others and help others? And so it's a really interesting way of War of the Worlds, A Quiet Place, World War Z, these type of disaster movies, but what's great about it is it has such a grounded hook of comets and asteroids and meteors and things that will hit this Earth, and they will again. So we went down that road.
One last question, we'll get to the audience questions. But you come from the world of stunt work, from being a stuntman. There's a push right now for a stunt Oscar. Every so often there's been a push, but it seems like there is more of a push right now. What do you think about that? I mean, do you think that's a necessary category for the Oscars, and do you think we'll have one?
I don't know. I think that I've never even spoke upon this, but yeah, I do think there should be one. I think that if you're going to have every single other category in the book, from visual effects to special effects to hair and makeup to costumes to camera, how could you not have stunts, a stunt coordinator, or the best, a stunt coordinator that would develop all the action of the movie? It just doesn't make sense to me. So my point is either start stripping a bunch of categories and keep it more about best picture and best actor and the bigger components, which most of us want to watch when we're watching the Oscars, or make it inclusive of the entire process. Will it happen? I don't know. I think the Academy is in its own kind of catastrophic Greenland, so to speak, right now, trying to figure itself out.
Do we have any audience questions? You, sir.
I'll bring the mic over.
Oh,
Sorry.
Hi. So, aside from Mike Manning, from the first two movies, when you do, was there anything you wanted to bring over from that, or did you kind of want to start completely fresh with this movie?
No, I didn't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. I wanted to take some of the legacy of, if you remember, Morgan Freeman was the Secretary of Defense in the first movie, and then he became the Vice President. Now you realize he's now the President. Mike Manning's evolution of they had a baby in the second movie, and now little Lynn is now 3 years old. Unfortunately, Lotta Mitchell couldn't make the schedule of this franchise, of this installment, so we brought in Piper Perabo. I think did a fantastic job. Otherwise, Lotta would have been in it as well. And there was talks about kind of reflecting back to the Angela Bassett role and certain Aaron Eckhart and so forth, and showing some of that. And then we thought, like again, Skyfall, try to just make a movie that brings you all the stuff that Bond franchise had, that you knew and loved about it. So I tried to keep some of that integrity from the first two movies, but bring you kind of a standalone movie, or that could act like a standalone movie. So if you hadn't seen the first two movies, you can make this your entry movie, understand the characters, and you could actually go right back and watch Olympus and Len Was Fallen and not miss a beat. So it was taking some of that, but yeah, I was trying to put a brand new spin and make it its own origin story, so to speak.
anybody else?
Okay. Was it accurate that the Secret Service would have turned over the investigation to the FBI, or would the Secret Service have done their own investigation when they were confronted with that situation?
That's actually a great question, and it is set up that if there is an assassination attempt on the president, the FBI is the investigating authority on past assassination attempt. That's what's happened. And the whole theory, or the reality being, you don't want the Secret Service investigating their own selves. So that is certainly accurately portrayed in the movie.
There is one kernel that you brought up, like what was one thing that we laced in that I don't know if everybody will catch. But what happened is we were filming the movie, and Morgan Freeman, I mean, you're never going to keep Morgan Freeman in a coma. Morgan Freeman's he's going to wake up. But the whole idea was that the transfer of power, because unfortunately our assassinations have been one thing, and then when Reagan was shot, that transfer of power never happened. So there has never been a transfer of power back to a president. What would be the assessment of that? Would there be, at least, Mickey and I started doing an in-depth thing of like, well, there'd have to be a medical evaluation. He just woke up from a coma. How would the DOJ step in? Like, there'd be so many things into it. So we just wanted to lay that in about at the end of the movie when Kirby's spinning his web and trying to keep pushing the button on his war, how they would be in the Oval Office and the war room talking about this transfer of powers never happened again. We didn't want to get into the the Easter egg hunt of like all the what ifs of it, but just to set that up, that is a real fact that has never happened before. So we thought that was really interesting to put in.
Thank you. Great show and great discussion. I have a technical question for the former Secret Service person. Toward the latter part of the movie, when the woman in charge of the investigation is suspicious of these people and she flies in with one other person, was it realistic that she had no backup and no one to support her in the event that she got attacked? When she did get attacked, it seemed to me that would have been a reasonable concern and reasonable expectation.
Yeah, good, very observant there. That was the FBI, and there probably would have been a lot of backup. I think they were on the way, actually. They just
There's Jada Pinkett Smith, man. I mean, she can kick ass on her own.
Yes.
But yeah, there is creative licenses you take on certain things like that. And our idea was that she was just going to investigate. And the minute that Wade Jennings sniffed her out, knew right away that this was a rabbit hole that he needed to shut down.
And in the movie, correct me if I'm wrong, but she had dealt with Wade before. She kind of knew Wade. She thought she could go in kind of low key and start
she had no indictment yet. She didn't have any criminal evidence.
Too much bravado there, huh?
Hi. Speaking of drones, I was wondering whether you used drone cameras in your scene in that building shootout at the end. The camera moved so smoothly down the hallways and from one room to another. I was wondering, was that on a drone or did you have it on some kind of a crane?
There's a lot of drone work in the movie. That is not one of them. That's a techno crane. It's a specialized 60-foot crane that I can push around corners and do things with. You wouldn't fly a drone in that kind of situation, just for safety. But the drone attack on the lake, we used camera drones constantly, and in other places in the movie. A lot of the rooftop sequence at the end, and a lot of the attack on the streets. They actually, it's interesting because it's in fact, I just use a lot of them on Greenland. We used to use helicopters a lot, and then everyone wanted to do drones because it was cheaper. But actually, the drones have now become far more effective if you need to be under 500 feet, because one, when you put a helicopter over your heads, well, your hair is going everywhere, and everything's blowing everywhere. So you've seen that in movies. So now we can have drones come into a shot and not disturb what's in front of the camera and get them in much more specialized places. But I'm on my way to Iceland to shoot Greenland. But I'm on my way to Iceland, and we'll be using helicopters because we're shooting at much higher altitude and much faster speeds. But drone camera work is, and we're using big drone helicopters, big 8-quad helicopters for our big movie cameras. But they've really found their place in our productions now.
Thanks for your time, first off. Secondly, I was curious to see how much Nick Nolte may have ad-libbed on some of his lines.
We didn't even give him a script, he just went. No, that the first thing I say to every actor I work with is I don't care about the lines, I just care about the subtext and what the intent of the scene is. So I'm not a stickler on the words, I let them go off script. But the basis of everything that was there was there. Their ad-libs back in, well, I'll give you an example. So the scene in the cabin talking about why he left them at an early age was 100% all scripted. His conversation with Leah about, remembering the only thing he knew was his son's birthday was all scripted. The ad-libs in the forest, yeah, those are definitely ad-libs. Those are things you do in the middle of the action. You let your actors just run loose and have a good time with it, but a lot of it was scripted. Okay, yeah, when he said I'll pee in here, that might have been ad-libbed.
Hello. I was impressed by the impression that Piper Perabo made, even though she didn't have a very big role. And she has done action on her own and her own stunts in the Covert Affairs TV series. So could you talk a little bit about how her role differed from the usual kind of female sort of just stuck in there to be another character in the movie?
No, it's a really fair question because, these movies are very tough to find. One, that could have been, it could have been any type of family member, not just a wife, and it's very hard to service them in a complete way because they're a tertiary character that aren't in the A story, right? We're not traveling with Leah Banning, we're traveling with Mike Banning, and and we're in Jada Pinkett Smith's and FBI agent's point of view, and we're in the bad guy's point of view, so to speak. So you try to find those pockets, and for me, what I said to Piper is, to me, the first movies didn't really kind of get more in depth in the family, and I wanted to explore that. And I also wanted to explore the complexity of a marriage where she's suspecting that her husband is hiding something. He's hiding the fact that he's taking painkillers. Maybe we talked about it and said, maybe we found pills, and you just didn't want to tell him about it. He didn't want to say anything until he brought it up himself, but it's something you're worried about. So in the scene where she's being interrogated by the FBI, does she believe the $10 million? No. She knows her husband's a good man, but the chink in the armor is when they ask her the question about the doctors. She didn't know about that, but she did know about the painkillers, and they see it in her face. And so that's where the lie starts to become truth, where you start finding moments. So we tried to find our moments with her to really have complexity of character. I will tell you, the hardest actors in that entire cast are the 3-year-old girls because they're twins. And Maisie was the one that we ended up using the most. And you usually get identical twins because of child hours. You only have so many hours, and you think 3-year-olds, they don't take many hours either. But you usually use a set of twins, and Piper was just fantastic about in bringing that little girl into it to where she became a big part of the family. So my hat's off to Piper. I was really ecstatic at working with her, and I thought that she brought warmth and strength to the character, and then also that complexity of dealing with knowing your husband's in jeopardy, but trying to protect him and honor him at the same time. But yeah, the next movie she's going to kick ass. She's going out with Mike.
I think we have time for one more question.
Hi, thank you. Enjoyed it very much. You brought up the child, so I'll ask you. The child was terrified, and that really upset me because I know it was acting, but it wasn't acting because it's a 3-year-old. So how can you justify that? How
No,
do you deal with that?
it's a very fair question, something that I've thought about, but so you know how that was filmed. I'm a father. I have twin boys that are 11. And I just work with a 7-year-old on set, and I'm very protective of kids on sets. I don't like them to get enamored with our business and try to make them to be kids. That happened to be the very first scene that we shot with Maisie. There were no guns in the scene. She just freaked out. And Piper, I said, Piper, let me show you guys, just keep going to have her cry so we can get all those moments. When you see the bad guy with the gun, we put that in VFX after the fact, so it's never around the child. But that's where what happened is after that day, Maisie settled down because Piper embraced her, and made her part of the pseudo mother, so to speak, on set. To where sometimes we would think, like when they're all at the dinner table with Danny Houston, we thought we'd just get Maisie's stuff really quick before she melted down, and then we would shoot the rest of the coverage. Maisie sat there for 4 hours through the entire scene. So the scene that you saw is very gut-wrenching to watch. And it is a little girl crying, but it is not. And it is not inflicted by guns or violence. It was just her not digging what's going on. In fact, when Piper picks her up out of the seat, you see her reaching. She's reaching for her mother that's 5 feet off camera. She wanted to get back to her real mother. That's all she wanted.
Thanks for the great questions.